Hello, Samuel, you can start now. Your mic is off.
Okay, can you hear me? Can you hear me all right?
Yes, just speak a little louder.
Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to yet another Node.js class. My name is Samuel. Um, okay, today we'll be talking about events in Node.js and how Node.js is an event-driven application and how Node.js is powered by events. So I think the topic for today is event, what they do and how they are critical, how they power the API of Node.js. So first, okay, let me present this. Okay. So I'd like to just make some things clear. We're going to be working with some APIs and stuff from the Node.js API. So you just need to know your basic JavaScript and what synchronous and asynchronous are, classes and methods and callback functions. But not worry, I'm going to talk about all of these syntax as we go along the class. Okay. So, just an overview. Node.js core API is built around event-driven architecture. Don't mind the asynchronous there. It just means that everything in Node.js, so I can say 70 to 80% of Node.js APIs or modules or internal modules uses an event-driven system. I'm going to talk about what that means in a while. Okay, it's one of the core concepts in Node is the concept of events, and a lot of the modules Node.js exposes to in its environment are all instances of the event emitter class. So, like the HTTP streams, processes, and other stuff we're going to look into in a short while. Just if you check the definition, or if you check if anybody's telling you what Node.js is, they'll tell you that Node.js is an event-driven backend language. Okay, so um, yeah, so this is an example of a Node.js application server. It's basically this is just how Node.js handles a network request. It listens if you create a server, you create a HTTP server and listen on a specific port. But the HTTP server, all what is going on here are all responses and requests to events. I'm going to explain that in a while, but basically what happens in this Node.js server is it receives a request for event and handles the event, and handles the excuse me, and handles the event and sends a response. Okay, let's continue. So I'm going to start by explaining what an event is, and we're going to talk about the event emitter class. An event is an English word, first of all, before an event emitter class. So an event is just basically in the scenario in Node.js, an event is a signal that something has happened in our application. There's an English definition to this. The- There's an English definition to this, but in our case, we just want to know what it does in Node.js or in our application. An event is a signal that something has happened in our application. So, um, okay, it's just like calm when you read, but we're just going to skip that. The event emitter module. So this is where we're going to spend most of our time on this evening. This is where we're going to spend most of our time on. The event emitter is a module or an API that facilitates communication between objects in Node. Like most of Node's um, exposed modules extend from this event emitter class. So what it means that this is what powers the event-driven system of Node.js. When you hear rest.on, rest.end, or http.create server, or all those events we emit and um, listen on in our Node.js application, the event emitter module is responsible for all those actions, and almost all of Node.js APIs, or a few of them, extend from this class. Okay, so an event emitter is at the core of Node.js asynchronous event. Okay, I said that many of Node.js built-in modules inherit from event. Yeah, like 80% of them. Then basically, before we go into giving some example, like this is just the core concept of what event does and how event works. The concept is it's quite simple. Emitter object emits named events that cause previously registered listeners to be called. So maybe in our application, I'll use maybe Node.js core API for an example. They already inbuilt listeners in the API that listen to events. So when maybe your request comes and emits a named event, the listeners respond to the event. It's all going to be clear when we start doing some examples. Okay, so basically this is a pictorial example of it. In like the whole idea of event-driven architecture or the event emitter class is you set listener that triggers a callback function when an event is emitted. So let's take a bell ringer for an example. There's always a speaker inside the room, inside the house. So when a visitor comes and rings a bell, the let's say the visitor emits an event and say, okay, I press this button, I ring a bell, and the speaker picks it up and like maybe plays a sound or something. But in our Node.js application, we can handle it in any way we want to handle. So basically, how event works is events are emitted or a message is called, a message is triggered. But before we were able to handle the event, listeners have to be registered to be able to handle the event synchronously. So it's just like how we know in the browser how we can set an event listener. If you work with JavaScript in the web API, there's an add event listener function where you can set a listener on maybe a click of a button or a mouse up or a window close and all like that, and passing a callback function to handle the request. So it's the same concept, it's the same event emitter being at work. So, okay, this is just the core concepts of how events work and event emitters per se. So, first of all, you register listeners in your application with the on method from the event emitter class. Then later in your application, you emit events, pardon me, that triggers those listeners, and you can set some predefined actions to maybe send a message or console.log or maybe send an email that something has happened in your application. So, okay, let me just give some practical example. Okay, I say that the event emitter is a core Node.js API class, so let's just require it const event emitter. Okay, so I'm not sure. Okay, I'm not going to assume everyone's familiar with it, but this is just the structuring. It returns a class, and that's why I like use a capital letter on this. But we can still require this in just a variable and destructure the event emitter class, but it's just still the same thing. Or let me just do it this way: event emitter is equal to require event. So basically, this is a class, and I'm sure you might have been familiar with what classes are. So this is a class. A class is just a bunch of containers for related objects and methods that do stuff. So we can create or instantiate an object from a class. So let's create our own custom event emitter object. So we're going to do const my emitter is equals to new event emitter. So basically, what this does is it creates an instance of this emitter and copies all the methods and properties and objects, or yeah, sorry, methods, functions, and variables inside it, and gives this variable a copy of all of them. So let's now give examples of what event emitter does and how it can be used in our application. So I'll go back to the slide now. So we register listeners with the on method and emit events later when we want to pass a message to the listener with the emit event. So let's give a basic example before we continue with the slides. Okay, let's do my emitter dot on the method I talked about, or my emitter dot on Okay. The on method takes two parameters. First of all, the name of the listener you want to listen on. Let's say on hello, it takes a callback function. We're going to explain what the callback function is. You can leave it empty, you can pass in arguments, but it takes a callback function. You can do something with it, but for now, let's just console.log it and just give an easy example of everything. Um, this event called was called. Okay. So right now, if I run this application, what do you think is going to happen? Um, let's try node events.js. Event, yeah, events.js. The application just runs and closes because all we did was just create a listener. There's nothing like emitting or calling the listener. If you look at the slide, you see you register the event listener with the on method and emit event, or maybe pass a message and say, okay, I just did something. We're going to see use cases of how all this work later, but let's just give easy examples right now. Okay, so we're going to say my emitter dot emit. So right now, what we're doing is maybe later in our application, let's say for example, we set this up at the beginning of our application, then there are going to be many stuff to heavy network or stuff here. Like maybe our application is going to run the whole route, and then maybe when an action is carried, we want to emit an event. I'll still going to demo all this with the server. We can just call this event with this specific name, and this listener will be triggered. The callback function to this listener will be triggered. Let me give an example. If we do, okay, okay, let me zoom in my screen. Um, okay, I think this is better. Yeah. Okay, so let's call or let's trigger this listener that we registered at maybe some place or some file in our application. So we're going to do events, my emitter dot emit, and we have to call a specific name. We have to call the specific name we registered it with, because if you don't call this name, because what this listener does is it listens on this particular string. So you have to call the specific string. Okay, we have to call the specific string for it to trigger that listener. I guess this is zoomed in enough. Okay. Yeah. So um, basically this is just the concept of like two concepts. You basically on method and you trigger the event, or you call the event later in your application. We're going to see how that works with the HTTP server. So when I run this out now, when I run, let's try that again. If I comment out just from this file, just take this let's say just
Hi, Samuel. Hello, Samuel. It's very hard to hear you. Can you speak louder, please?
Let's shake, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now. But you need to speak louder, like much louder.
Okay, okay. Is is it clearer now?
Yeah, it's fine. Just go on, but with a louder voice. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So I was about to just run an example. I don't know what happened. So okay, let's run the file without the emitter being on. What happens is the file just runs and stops. Okay. So, but if I uncomment this now, if I uncomment this now, if you notice we have the on method and the emit method being live, not commented out. And if you notice or if you can observe, they are both the same file or the same string or the same name. And run this file. Okay. Okay, sorry, I didn't save. Sorry about that. If I run this file right now, you see it's going to console.log what we asked it to console. So basically, what this does is just an example of the publish and subscriber method. So this is a subscriber or this listens on a particular string or a particular variable and emits an emitter calls this listener. So we're going to see in a short while how this can be useful in our application in how it works in Node.js, but basically this is all it does. I just want to talk about a few things. So let's say if you register a listener, if you register a listener with a particular string and try to call it with another string, like let's say you want to call hello, this will not work because this listener is listening on this particular word. Or let's change this to hello world, yeah, and leave this as hello. So to be two actual words. If you run this file now, nothing happens. Let me run it again. See, nothing happens. So basically, you set listeners and call listeners with that same string, and you have event listeners. So let's go back to some. Okay, yeah, let's go back to our slide and see what we have. Okay, yeah.